Have you ever watched someone walk into a hotel, smile at a stranger, step into an elevator, and disappear forever? It happened in one of the most beautiful vacation destinations in the world, where millions of people travel every year believing they have left their worries behind. Surveillance cameras captured the final known moments of a young woman's life. What they did not capture was the horror waiting behind a hotel room door, or the painstaking investigation that would uncover one of Hawaii's most disturbing murder cases. This is the tragic story of Ivanis, Ivy Harris, a woman whose final hours would leave investigators chasing a trail of surveillance footage, forensic evidence, and unanswered questions before justice finally caught up with the man responsible. Before we begin, welcome to Cold Case 247. If you enjoy well-researched true crime documentaries that focus on real investigations, real victims, and the pursuit of justice, make sure you like this video, leave a comment, and hit the subscribe button. Your support helps us continue bringing these important cases to light. Now, let's begin. On the surface, everything about Ivy's trip looked like the beginning of a memorable vacation. The Hawaiian Islands have long been seen as a paradise. Endless beaches, warm ocean breezes, breathtaking sunsets, and vibrant nightlife attract visitors from all over the world. For many people, arriving in Waikiki represents an escape from everyday life. It is a place where strangers become friends, laughter fills the streets late into the night, and unforgettable memories are made. For Ivanis Harris, known lovingly as Ivy by her family and close friends, Hawaii represented something she had been looking forward to for weeks. She was approaching her 28th birthday and wanted to spend time away from home enjoying herself. She had traveled from Portland, Oregon, to Honolulu with two companions, Mark Miles Jr. and Jillian. Like countless other tourists, they planned to enjoy the beaches, experience the nightlife, and celebrate Ivy's birthday surrounded by the beauty of Waikiki. Those who knew Ivy described her as energetic, outgoing, and compassionate. She had a bright smile that naturally drew people toward her. Friends often remembered how easily she could start conversations with complete strangers and make them feel comfortable. Her mother remained in regular contact with her throughout the trip, exchanging text messages that reflected nothing but excitement and happiness. Earlier that day, Ivy spent hours relaxing on Waikiki Beach. She laughed with her companions, posed for photographs, and enjoyed the warm Hawaiian sunshine. Like so many travelers do, she documented parts of her vacation on social media, sharing a glimpse of what appeared to be the perfect tropical getaway. To anyone looking at those pictures, there was nothing unusual. Nothing suggested that within hours, everything would change forever. Before the evening began, Ivy sent another message to her mother. She explained that she was having a wonderful time and was excited about celebrating her birthday. Thousands of miles away, her mother read the message with relief. Every parent wants to know their child is safe, especially when they are traveling far from home. There was no reason for concern. Hawaii felt safe. Ivy sounded happy. Everything seemed normal. No one could have imagined that those simple words would become one of the last conversations they would ever share. As daylight faded into another beautiful Hawaiian evening, the group returned to their hotel to prepare for a night out. Waikiki comes alive after dark. Music pours from restaurants and bars. Tourists stroll along brightly lit streets. The atmosphere is lively and welcoming, making it easy to lose track of time. Inside their hotel room, everyone began getting ready for the evening. But Ivy grew impatient. She did not want to wait while everyone else finished preparing. Instead, she decided to head out on her own, telling her companions that she would meet them later at Kelly Onnell's, a well-known Irish pub in Waikiki. It seemed like a perfectly ordinary decision. People on vacation separate and reconnect all the time. Nobody considered it dangerous. Her companions expected to see her again within the next hour or two. Instead, they were unknowingly watching Ivy walk into the final chapter of her life. Sometime after leaving the hotel, Ivy made her way through the busy streets of Waikiki. The nightlife was in full swing. Visitors laughed outside restaurants. Music echoed through the streets. Taxi drivers picked up passengers while hotel staff welcomed guests arriving late into the evening. Among the thousands of people enjoying the warm Hawaiian night, Ivy blended in effortlessly. At some point during those early morning hours, she encountered a man she had never met before. Their conversation appeared casual. Witnesses would later remember seeing the two speaking outside a bar. Nothing about their interaction immediately stood out as suspicious. There were no obvious signs of conflict or fear. What nobody knew was that this brief meeting would become the focus of one of Hawaii's most closely examined murder investigations. Meanwhile, Mark and Jillian eventually left their hotel room and headed toward Kelly Onell's, expecting Ivy to already be there. When they arrived, they searched the crowded bar. She was nowhere to be found. At first, they assumed she had simply wandered somewhere else. Perhaps she had met other tourists. Perhaps she had decided to visit another nearby bar. Waikiki offers countless places within walking distance, making it easy for groups to become separated for short periods. They waited. Minutes turned into hours. Still no Ivy. As the night stretched into morning, concern slowly replaced confidence. Calls to her phone went unanswered. Text messages received no reply. Friends checked nearby bars and surrounding streets, hoping she had simply lost track of time. Nothing. By sunrise, the excitement surrounding Ivy's birthday had disappeared entirely. Something felt terribly wrong. The people who knew her best agreed on one thing. She would never simply vanish without letting someone know where she was. After exhausting every possibility they could think of, Mark reported Ivy missing to the Honolulu Police Department. He explained that she had gone out alone during the night and never returned. Officers gathered the basic details. They collected her description, recent photographs, clothing information, and the timeline provided by those who had traveled with her. At first glance, investigators had very little to work with. A missing tourist in one of the busiest destinations in Hawaii. No confirmed witnesses after she left for the bar. No known enemies. No obvious reason why she would disappear voluntarily. Cases involving missing adults can be incredibly difficult during the earliest stages. Investigators must determine whether someone intentionally left on their own, became injured, experienced an accident, or became the victim of a crime. Every passing hour matters. The sooner detectives establish a reliable timeline, the greater the chance of uncovering critical evidence. The investigation was assigned to Detective Drew Ukagi, an experienced homicide investigator with the Honolulu Police Department. Ukagi understood that modern investigations often begin long before forensic laboratories become involved. They begin with cameras. Waikiki is one of the most heavily monitored tourist districts in Hawaii. Hotels maintain extensive surveillance systems. Businesses record entrances and sidewalks. Banks operate cameras around automated teller machines. Traffic cameras overlook major intersections. Visitors may never notice them, but nearly every movement through Waikiki leaves behind a digital footprint. If Ivy had remained within the area after leaving her hotel, there was a strong possibility that one of those cameras had recorded her. Detective Ukagi immediately began requesting surveillance footage from nearby businesses and hotels. Hours of video needed to be reviewed. Every camera captured different angles. Every timestamp had to be verified. It was tedious work requiring patience and careful attention to detail. For investigators, a single overlooked frame can mean the difference between solving a case and watching it grow cold forever. Eventually, the detective located footage showing Ivy near Kelly Onell's during the early morning hours. The recording confirmed that she had indeed reached the area. However, something unexpected quickly caught his attention. Although cameras showed Ivy outside the establishment, investigators found no evidence that she had actually entered the bar. Employees working that night could not confidently remember serving her. If she had planned to meet her companions there, why had she remained outside? Who had changed her plans? Detectives continued searching through additional recordings collected from nearby businesses. Then another surveillance system revealed something far more significant. Inside the Aston Waikiki Beach Hotel, cameras recorded Ivy entering the lobby during the early morning hours. She was no longer alone. Walking beside her was an unidentified man. The footage showed the pair moving calmly through the lobby together. There appeared to be no signs of distress. No struggle. No attempt to escape. Nothing that would immediately alarm anyone watching in real time. They approached the elevators together. When the elevator doors opened, they stepped inside. Just before the doors closed, the camera captured a brief kiss between them. It was the last confirmed recording of Ivy Harris alive. Investigators replayed those few seconds repeatedly. Who was the man? Was he another tourist? Had they only recently met? Did anyone know his identity? Those questions would soon become the center of the investigation. At that moment, detectives still hoped Ivy might somehow be found alive. But as every hour passed without contact, optimism slowly began giving way to something much darker. Detective Ukagi understood that identifying the unknown man was now the investigation's highest priority. He had no name, no room number, no vehicle information. Only surveillance footage showing someone who had become the final known person seen with Ivy before she vanished. What investigators would uncover next would transform a missing person investigation into a homicide case unlike anything they had expected. And the surveillance footage they had already collected was only the beginning. The surveillance footage from the Aston Waikiki Beach Hotel quickly became the most valuable piece of evidence investigators possessed. Detective Drew Ukagi knew that every second recorded by those cameras could reveal something the people involved never intended anyone else to see. Cases involving surveillance are rarely solved by dramatic discoveries all at once. Instead, investigators often spend countless hours watching the same recordings repeatedly, studying every movement, every timestamp, and every person who enters or leaves the frame. Tiny details that seem meaningless at first can eventually become the key to solving an entire case. Ukagi returned to the hotel's surveillance system and began building a complete timeline of everyone who had crossed paths with Ivy that morning. The footage confirmed what detectives already knew. Ivy entered the hotel with the unidentified man during the early hours of May 16th. They appeared relaxed. Nothing in their behavior suggested that violence was about to unfold. They walked side by side toward the elevator, disappearing from the camera's view as the doors slowly closed. That elevator ride would become the final confirmed moment anyone ever saw Ivy alive. The investigation now shifted to discovering what happened after those elevator doors closed. Detectives continued reviewing recordings from every available camera inside the hotel. Hours later, another video caught Detective Ukagi's attention. It was shortly after 5 o'clock that same morning. The elevator doors opened once again. The same man stepped out alone. Ivy was nowhere in sight. At first glance, he appeared to be checking out of the hotel with his belongings. But as investigators watched more carefully, they noticed something deeply unsettling. He was pulling a large rolling duffel bag behind him. The bag did not move smoothly. Several times it caught against the floor or doorway, forcing him to stop and reposition it before continuing. Even after correcting its position, he struggled to keep it moving. To experienced investigators, it looked unusually heavy. There was another detail that immediately stood out. Although Hawaii's weather was warm and humid, the man was dressed in jeans and a long-sleeved shirt. He also wore a floppy bucket hat pulled low over his head. Perhaps any one of those details could have been explained away. Together, however, they painted a different picture. As the elevator camera recorded his movements, the man never once turned toward it. Instead, he deliberately faced the corner throughout the entire ride. His back remained toward the camera the entire time. Detectives replayed the footage repeatedly. It appeared almost as though he knew exactly where the camera was positioned and intentionally avoided allowing it to capture his face. That behavior immediately raised suspicions. Most hotel guests never think about surveillance cameras. This man seemed unusually aware of them. The footage continued as he exited the elevator and made his way toward the hotel's valet area. Outside, a white sport utility vehicle had already been brought around for him. A valet employee approached, offering assistance with the large duffel bag. The man declined. Instead, he attempted to lift the bag into the rear of the vehicle himself. The task proved difficult. He paused several times, adjusting his grip before finally managing to force the bag into the cargo area. Investigators later noted another detail that caught their attention. Once the bag was loaded, the rear of the vehicle appeared to settle lower beneath its weight. No one could say with certainty what was inside that duffel bag simply by watching the footage. But Detective Ukagi could not ignore the growing list of troubling circumstances. The unidentified man had entered the hotel with Ivy. Only he emerged. He was now transporting an unusually heavy bag while making what appeared to be deliberate efforts to conceal his identity from surveillance cameras. The questions were becoming increasingly difficult to dismiss. Where was Ivy? Why had she not left with him? What exactly was inside that bag? The answers were still unknown. But investigators believed they were getting closer. The surveillance timeline did not end there. Several hours later, shortly after 9 o'clock that morning, the cameras captured the same man once again. He returned to the hotel. His appearance had barely changed. He was still wearing the same jeans, the same long-sleeved shirt, the same bucket hat. This time, however, one important thing was missing. The large rolling duffel bag was gone. Instead, he carried only a small white towel. Detective Ukagi carefully compared the timestamps. Ivy entered the hotel with the man during the early morning hours. Roughly 2 hours later, the man departed alone with the heavy bag. Hours after that, he returned without it. Those missing hours suddenly became one of the most critical periods in the investigation. Where had he driven? Why had he returned without the bag? What had happened during the time between leaving and coming back? Investigators knew they needed to identify him as quickly as possible. Every minute mattered. If he was responsible for Ivy's disappearance, delaying the investigation could allow valuable evidence to disappear forever. Detectives expanded their search. They reviewed footage from surrounding streets, nearby businesses, parking areas, traffic cameras. Every available recording was examined in hopes of tracing the white sport utility vehicle after it left the hotel. Meanwhile, Ivy remained missing. Her family back in Oregon desperately waited for updates. Each passing day became increasingly painful. Hope slowly gave way to fear. The woman who had traveled to Hawaii looking forward to celebrating another birthday had seemingly vanished without a trace. Then, 4 days after Ivy disappeared, the investigation took a devastating turn. Far from Waikiki's crowded beaches and luxury hotels lies a much quieter part of Oahu. The western coastline is strikingly beautiful but far more isolated than the island's tourist districts. Steep cliffs, dense vegetation, and rugged terrain make many areas difficult to access. It was near Mekua Cave that a young boy exploring the area noticed something unusual lying among thick brush below a hillside. As he moved closer, he realized he was looking at the body of a woman. Terrified, he immediately sought help. Emergency responders and homicide detectives quickly arrived at the scene. The condition of the remains suggested the body had been exposed to Hawaii's tropical climate for several days. Investigators carefully secured the area while forensic specialists documented every possible piece of evidence before the body was removed. Eventually, identification confirmed what detectives had feared. The victim was Ivanis Harris. The missing tourist from Portland had been found. For everyone involved in the investigation, the mission changed instantly. This was no longer a missing persons case. It had become a homicide investigation. The medical examiner conducted an autopsy to determine how Ivy had died. Because her body had remained exposed outdoors for several days, decomposition complicated the examination. Investigators could not determine every detail surrounding her final moments. However, the medical examiner reached one unmistakable conclusion. Ivy had suffered a fatal injury to her neck. Her death was ruled a homicide. Someone had intentionally taken her life. Just as disturbing was the apparent effort made to conceal the crime. Whoever killed Ivy had transported her body across the island before abandoning her in a remote location where it might never have been discovered. Had that young boy not wandered into the area when he did, investigators might have searched for weeks, or even months, without finding her. Detective Ukagi now possessed several important pieces of the puzzle. He had surveillance footage showing Ivy entering a hotel with an unidentified man. He had video showing that same man leaving alone with a heavy duffel bag. He had a remote crime scene where Ivy's body had been recovered. But none of it would matter unless detectives could identify the man from the hotel. Without his identity, investigators still lacked someone they could question, search, or place directly at the center of the crime. The search intensified. Every available lead was examined. Detectives requested hotel guest records, rental vehicle information, telephone records, anything capable of connecting an unknown face to a real name. One discovery quickly stood out. Investigators learned that the man had been using a prepaid cellular telephone during his stay in Hawaii. Unlike standard contract phones, prepaid devices are often purchased anonymously and used for short periods, making them more difficult to trace. Even so, they are not invisible. Every time a phone connects to a nearby cellular tower, it leaves behind a record of its general location. Detectives obtained those records. When they examined the phone's activity, the results immediately caught their attention. On the morning Ivy disappeared, only hours after the man left the hotel carrying the heavy duffel bag, his phone connected to a cellular tower serving the remote Waianae coast. That location was significant. It was only a short distance from where Ivy's body would later be discovered. Then investigators noticed something else. Later that same day, the phone returned to the very same isolated area. 2 separate trips. The same remote coastline. The same day Ivy vanished. Detective Ukagi began developing a theory. He believed the suspect may have driven to the area earlier that morning searching for a location where Ivy's body could be hidden. Then, according to the investigative theory, he returned later after completing his plans. Although the surveillance footage alone could not prove exactly what happened during those missing hours, the timeline was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. Every new piece of evidence seemed to point investigators toward the same unknown man. Still, they needed something stronger. Something that would allow them to identify him beyond any reasonable doubt. The breakthrough would come from an unexpected place. Inside the hotel's own reservation records. And once detectives connected the surveillance footage to a single guest room, the investigation would uncover an identity that shocked everyone involved. No one expected the man at the center of this investigation to have the background he did. His name would soon become public. And the life he appeared to live stood in stark contrast to the horrifying crime investigators believed he had committed. The breakthrough came quietly. There was no dramatic confession. No anonymous phone call. No witness suddenly walking into a police station with the answers detectives had been searching for. Instead, it came from careful investigative work. Detective Drew Ukagi returned to the Aston Waikiki Beach Hotel and requested more than surveillance footage. He wanted access to guest records, check-in logs, room assignments, and housekeeping reports. If the unidentified man had been staying at the hotel, somewhere inside those records was the key to identifying him. Investigators began comparing the surveillance timeline with the hotel's reservation system. They looked for guests who had checked in alone. They looked for someone whose physical build matched the man seen on camera. They also searched for guests who had declined housekeeping services during their stay. On its own, refusing housekeeping means very little. Many travelers simply prefer privacy. But when viewed alongside everything else investigators had already uncovered, it became another detail worth examining. One room quickly attracted attention. Room 924. The guest assigned to that room had checked into the hotel alone. He had requested that housekeeping not enter the room during his stay. When detectives compared the hotel's check-in footage with the surveillance recordings taken after Ivy disappeared, they believed they were looking at the same individual. The similarities were difficult to ignore. The same build. The same mannerisms. The same rolling duffel bag. The same effort to avoid allowing security cameras to capture a clear view of his face. For the first time since Ivy vanished, investigators had something they desperately needed. A name. The guest registered to room 924 was Nathaniel Cosby. Before detectives even spoke to him, they began examining his background. What they discovered surprised nearly everyone involved in the investigation. Nathaniel Cosby was not a career criminal. He was not known to local law enforcement. He was not someone living on the fringes of society. Instead, he had spent nearly 2 decades serving in the United States Marine Corps. Cosby held the rank of Master Sergeant. According to military records, he had served since the mid-1990s and worked in explosive ordnance disposal, one of the military's most specialized and demanding occupations. Bomb technicians undergo extensive training and are trusted with responsibilities requiring discipline, technical expertise, and sound judgment under extraordinary pressure. To those who knew only his professional background, Nathaniel Cosby appeared to embody responsibility and self-control. He had earned promotions. He had received trust. He had built a career that required exceptional competence. Yet detectives now believed this decorated Marine had been the last person seen with Ivy Harris before her murder. The contrast was impossible to ignore. On paper, he represented discipline. In the investigation unfolding before detectives, he represented suspicion. As investigators continued examining the evidence, another important part of Ivy's life emerged. It was information that explained why she had crossed paths with Cosby that night, but it did not change what happened to her. Public records and investigative findings revealed that Ivy worked as a traveling escort. She advertised her services online while traveling between different cities. According to investigators, she had been open about her work with people close to her. During the Hawaii trip, advertisements promoting escort services had been posted online shortly before her disappearance. Authorities also determined that Mark Miles Jr., the man initially described as Ivy's boyfriend, played a more complicated role in her life. Investigators later identified him as someone who managed the escort operation in which Ivy and another woman, Jillian, were involved. The group had traveled through several states while conducting that business. For detectives, this information helped explain why Ivy had separated from her companions that night. It also explained how she likely came into contact with Nathaniel Cosby outside the Waikiki bar. But investigators were careful not to confuse explanation with justification. Nothing about Ivy's occupation changed the nature of the crime. Nothing about her circumstances diminished the value of her life. Like every victim, she deserved dignity. She deserved safety. She deserved to return home alive. The decisions she made to survive financially did not grant anyone permission to harm her. That remained one of the central truths of the investigation. As detectives continued preparing their case, they focused on evidence rather than assumptions. Surveillance footage. Telephone records. Hotel documents. Vehicle information. Each piece strengthened the timeline surrounding Ivy's final hours. Eventually, investigators believed they had enough evidence to bring Nathaniel Cosby in for questioning. On the 3rd day of June, investigators arrested him at Honolulu International Airport. The interview began calmly. At first, Cosby admitted to certain parts of the timeline. He acknowledged meeting Ivy outside a Waikiki bar. He admitted bringing her back to his hotel room. He acknowledged that the two had spent time together. Up to that point, his account generally aligned with what investigators had already established through surveillance footage. But when detectives shifted the conversation toward Ivy's disappearance, the interview changed. Investigators began presenting the evidence. They showed him surveillance images from the hotel. There was footage of him entering the elevator with Ivy. There was footage of him leaving hours later with the large rolling duffel bag. There was footage showing his return after the bag had disappeared. Piece by piece, detectives confronted him with the timeline they had reconstructed. Then they asked the question they had wanted answered from the beginning. What happened inside room 924? According to investigators, Cosby denied killing Ivy. But as more evidence was placed before him, the interview came to an abrupt halt. He invoked his constitutional right to remain silent. He requested an attorney. From that moment forward, the questioning ended. Investigators respected his legal rights. But although the interview was over, the investigation was far from finished. Detectives believed they were close. Unfortunately, one major obstacle remained. Forensic testing takes time. Items collected from the hotel room and the duffel bag had been submitted for laboratory analysis. Investigators believed those examinations could provide crucial scientific evidence linking Ivy directly to Cosby. The problem was that the results were not yet complete. Under Hawaii law, prosecutors faced strict deadlines for filing formal criminal charges after an arrest. Without the forensic results, prosecutors concluded that they were not yet prepared to move forward with the murder charge. As a result, Cosby was released from civilian custody while the investigation continued. The decision frustrated many people. To investigators who had spent weeks reconstructing the case, it felt like progress had suddenly stopped. Cosby was reassigned to Marine Corps Base Hawaii while authorities awaited the laboratory findings that could determine the future of the investigation. For Ivy's family, the wait was agonizing. They already knew their daughter was gone. Now they were forced to watch as the legal process moved at its own pace. Justice often depends not only on suspicion but on evidence that can withstand the scrutiny of a courtroom. Investigators understood that rushing the case without complete forensic support could jeopardize everything they had worked to build. So they waited. Weeks turned into months. Behind the scenes, scientists continued examining every item collected during the investigation. The answers detectives had been waiting for were slowly emerging inside the forensic laboratory. And when those results finally arrived, they would transform a strong circumstantial case into one supported by powerful physical evidence. The scientific findings would reveal that Ivy had not surrendered quietly. In her final moments, she fought with every ounce of strength she had. And the evidence she left behind would help ensure that the man investigators believed was responsible could no longer hide behind silence. Months passed, but the investigation never stopped moving. While the public heard very little about the case, detectives, forensic specialists, and military investigators continued working behind the scenes. Every piece of evidence collected from the hotel, the rental vehicle, and the surrounding crime scenes was carefully examined. The goal was simple: build a case based on facts that could withstand the scrutiny of a courtroom. For Ivy's family, however, the silence was almost unbearable. Every day without answers felt like another reminder that their daughter would never return home. They had watched what began as a birthday trip turn into a homicide investigation that now stretched across both civilian and military jurisdictions. Then, after months of waiting, the forensic laboratory delivered the results investigators had hoped for. The evidence recovered from Nathaniel Cosby's belongings provided powerful scientific support for the timeline detectives had reconstructed. According to investigators, DNA testing linked biological evidence recovered from the inside of Cosby's rolling duffel bag to Ivy Harris. It was a significant breakthrough. The surveillance footage had already shown Cosby struggling to move the unusually heavy bag through the hotel. Now, Forensic evidence connected that same bag to the victim. But investigators were not finished examining its contents. Inside the duffel bag, forensic specialists also recovered strands of hair consistent with Ivy's wig, along with fragments of her fingernails. To experienced investigators, those findings carried enormous significance. Broken fingernails are often consistent with a violent struggle. They can indicate that a victim desperately fought against an attacker, clawing at anything within reach while trying to escape. Although no one can know exactly what happened during Ivy's final moments inside that hotel room, the physical evidence suggested that she resisted. She fought for her life. She did not simply disappear without a struggle. Every fragment collected by forensic scientists became another silent witness speaking on her behalf. Investigators also reviewed additional surveillance footage gathered from locations beyond the hotel. One recording, captured at an automated teller machine shortly before Cosby left Hawaii, drew particular attention. Detectives observed what appeared to be a fresh injury above his right eyebrow. While the footage itself could not establish exactly how the injury occurred, investigators considered it noteworthy when viewed alongside the evidence indicating that Ivy had fought back. To detectives, the developing picture was becoming increasingly clear. The surveillance timeline, the hotel records, the prepaid cellular telephone, the rental vehicle, the forensic evidence. Each piece strengthened the case independently. Together, they formed a compelling chain of evidence. With the laboratory results finally complete, military prosecutors moved forward. Nathaniel Cosby was formally charged under the military justice system. The charges included murder, obstruction of justice, and patronizing a prostitute. The case would proceed through an Article 32 hearing, a military proceeding similar in purpose to a civilian preliminary hearing. During that hearing, prosecutors presented the evidence they had assembled over months of investigation. The military judge reviewed the surveillance footage, the forensic findings, the witness statements, the telephone records, the hotel documentation. After considering the evidence, the judge determined that sufficient probable cause existed to move the case forward. Nathaniel Cosby would face a general court-martial. For Ivy's loved ones, the decision represented an important step. But it was not justice. Not yet. A trial still lay ahead. Meanwhile, another investigation connected to Ivy's life was unfolding hundreds of miles away. Federal authorities had launched an operation targeting individuals suspected of transporting women across state lines for commercial sexual exploitation. Known publicly as Operation Traffic Stop, the investigation focused on several people believed to be involved in interstate prostitution activities. Among those indicted was Mark Miles Jr. According to federal prosecutors, Miles was accused of transporting women, including Ivy and Jillian, across multiple states, including Hawaii, in violation of federal law. His indictment was completely separate from Ivy's murder case. Authorities never alleged that Mark Miles participated in her killing. However, investigators believed the federal case provided additional context regarding the circumstances surrounding Ivy's travel and employment at the time of her death. For Ivy's family, these developments created complicated emotions. Nothing uncovered during either investigation changed the woman they remembered. To them, Ivy was not defined by headlines or court documents. She was a daughter. She was a sister. She was someone who laughed with friends, spoke regularly with her mother, and believed she still had a future waiting for her. Like every homicide victim, she was far more than the worst thing that ever happened to her. True crime stories often become consumed by the identity of the offender. Photographs of suspects appear repeatedly across television screens and newspaper articles. Their names become widely recognized. Meanwhile, victims risk becoming little more than a footnote. That is why it is important to remember Ivy for who she was beyond the investigation. She had hopes. She had plans. She had people who loved her deeply. Those closest to her described someone who wanted to build a better future. A young woman who still believed life held opportunities she had not yet reached. Those dreams ended inside a hotel room in Waikiki. The evidence suggests that, in her final moments, she fought with extraordinary determination. Although she could not save herself, the physical evidence she left behind became one of the strongest voices speaking for her long after she was gone. The investigation into Ivy's murder demonstrated how modern homicide cases often depend on the combination of traditional detective work and advancing forensic science. No single piece of evidence solved the case. It was the careful assembly of countless details that revealed the truth. A surveillance camera captured a meeting. Another documented a suspicious departure. Hotel records identified a guest. Telephone records traced movements across the island. Forensic scientists connected physical evidence to both the victim and the suspect. Each element alone may have raised questions. Together, they answered them. The case also served as a reminder that appearances can be profoundly misleading. To strangers, Nathaniel Cosby appeared to be a respected military professional with a long career of honorable service. Few people who crossed paths with him during his stay in Hawaii could have imagined that he would become the focus of one of the island's most disturbing homicide investigations. For investigators, however, careers, titles, and reputations could never outweigh evidence. Their responsibility was to follow the facts wherever they led. And in this case, the facts consistently pointed in one direction. If you're still watching at this point, drop a comment with, "I'm still here." Let's see who's truly following this shocking story. As the trial approached, prosecutors prepared to present months of investigative work before a military court. Every surveillance recording. Every forensic report. Every witness statement. Every scientific finding. Together, they would tell the story of Ivy's final hours, not through speculation, but through evidence painstakingly collected by investigators determined to speak for a victim who no longer could. As the court-martial drew closer, both prosecutors and defense attorneys spent months preparing their cases. Every piece of evidence had to be carefully reviewed. Every witness had to be interviewed. Every timeline had to be verified. Unlike television dramas, homicide prosecutions are rarely fast. They often involve years of preparation before a verdict is ever reached. Investigators understood that every decision made inside the courtroom would be examined in detail, especially in a case built almost entirely on surveillance footage, forensic science, and circumstantial evidence. The prosecution's argument was straightforward. According to military prosecutors, Nathaniel Cosby met Ivy during the early morning hours in Waikiki before bringing her back to his hotel room. Sometime after they entered the room, prosecutors alleged that Cosby killed her by causing a fatal injury to her neck. They argued that he then concealed her body inside the rolling duffel bag seen on surveillance footage before transporting her to the remote area where she was eventually discovered. The defense challenged that version of events. Defense attorneys questioned portions of the investigation and argued that prosecutors had not established every detail of what happened inside the hotel room. As in every criminal trial, the burden rested entirely on the prosecution. They had to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt using the evidence presented before the military court. Throughout the proceedings, the surveillance recordings remained among the most compelling exhibits. Jurors watched Ivy enter the Aston Waikiki Beach Hotel alongside Cosby. They saw the two walk calmly toward the elevator. They watched the elevator doors close behind them. Then they saw another recording captured only hours later. Cosby leaving alone. Dragging the same large rolling duffel bag. Struggling with its weight. Attempting to keep his face hidden from the camera. Returning later without the bag. Each recording represented another piece of a timeline that prosecutors argued pointed toward only one reasonable conclusion. Forensic experts then explained the scientific evidence. They described how biological material recovered from the duffel bag was analyzed. They explained the significance of the DNA results. They discussed the hair and fingernail fragments recovered during laboratory examinations. Experts carefully described their findings without speculation, allowing the evidence to speak for itself. Investigators also testified about Cosby's prepaid cellular telephone. Records placed the device near the isolated Waianae coast during the hours immediately following Ivy's disappearance. Those same records later showed another trip to the same remote area. Prosecutors argued that these movements closely matched the timeline established through surveillance footage and the eventual discovery of Ivy's body. The rental vehicle records were also introduced. Investigators explained that the vehicle accumulated hundreds of miles during Cosby's relatively short stay in Hawaii. Although driving around Oahu is common for visitors exploring the island, prosecutors argued that the mileage became significant when considered alongside the telephone records and the location where Ivy's body was ultimately found. No single piece of evidence stood alone. Instead, prosecutors relied upon the cumulative strength of every fact uncovered during the investigation. Each witness added another piece. Each exhibit strengthened the overall picture. By the time both sides completed presenting evidence, the military court had heard weeks of testimony detailing nearly every known moment of Ivy's final day. For Ivy's family, sitting through those proceedings was unimaginably painful. Every photograph, every surveillance recording, every forensic report. Each one forced them to relive the loss of someone they loved deeply. Courtrooms focus on evidence. Families remember birthdays, holiday celebrations, phone calls, shared laughter, dreams that will never become reality. While attorneys debated facts and legal standards, Ivy's loved ones carried the emotional weight of knowing that nothing, not even a conviction, could bring her home. Eventually, the military judge reached a verdict. Nathaniel Cosby was found guilty of murdering Ivanis Harris. He was also convicted on related charges presented during the court-martial. The verdict represented the culmination of an investigation that had begun with a missing persons report and ended with an overwhelming body of evidence assembled through months of patient detective work. Following his conviction, Cosby was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole, along with additional penalties imposed under the military justice system. He was also dishonorably discharged from the United States Marine Corps, bringing an end to a military career that had once appeared distinguished. For investigators, the sentence marked the conclusion of years of work. For Ivy's family, it represented accountability. Justice can never erase grief. It cannot restore birthdays that were never celebrated. It cannot return conversations that were never finished. But it can ensure that the person responsible is held accountable under the law. The murder of Ivanis Ivy Harris remains one of Hawaii's most widely discussed homicide cases because it illustrates how determination, technology, and forensic science can work together to uncover the truth. Without surveillance cameras, investigators may never have identified the last person seen with Ivy. Without patient analysis of hotel records, telephone data, and rental vehicle information, the timeline may never have been reconstructed. Without forensic science, critical physical evidence might never have connected the suspect to the crime. Every investigator involved contributed another piece to a puzzle that, at first, seemed almost impossible to solve. Most importantly, the case reminds us that every victim deserves to be remembered with dignity. Ivy's occupation became a major focus in media coverage, but it should never define her entire life. She was someone's daughter. Someone's friend. Someone who laughed on a Hawaiian beach only hours before her life was taken. She deserved the chance to grow older. She deserved the opportunity to return home. She deserved the future that was stolen from her. Her story is also a reminder that violence can occur in places people believe are perfectly safe. Paradise does not make a community immune from tragedy. Even in destinations visited by millions every year, evil can hide behind ordinary moments and familiar faces. What ultimately brought justice in this case was not luck. It was persistence. Detectives refused to stop searching. Forensic scientists refused to overlook the smallest pieces of evidence. Investigators followed every lead, no matter how small. And because they did, the truth eventually emerged. Today, Ivy's name continues to be remembered not because of the violence that ended her life, but because her case demonstrated that even the most carefully concealed crimes can leave behind evidence. Evidence that speaks. Evidence that endures. Evidence that helps give a voice to victims who can no longer speak for themselves. Thank you for staying with us through this heartbreaking case. If you believe victims deserve to have their stories remembered and justice pursued, please take a moment to like this video, leave your thoughts respectfully in the comments, and subscribe to Cold Case 247. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss another in-depth true crime documentary. Your support helps keep these stories alive, honors the victims, and ensures that the pursuit of justice is never forgotten. Until next time, stay safe, stay informed, and remember, behind every case file is a real person whose life mattered.